I was sitting in my home office reviewing contracts for next month's events when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Amanda Foster, the wedding planner I'd hired for my brother-in-law Brandon's upcoming wedding. I smiled as I answered, expecting to discuss final details for what was supposed to be the event of the year. "Hi, Amanda. How's everything going with the preparations?" There was an uncomfortable pause before she spoke, her voice strangely formal. "Victoria, I need to discuss something important with you regarding the wedding arrangements." Something in her tone made my stomach drop. I set down my pen and gave her my full attention. "What's wrong? Is there a problem with the venue?" "Well, there's been a change to the guest list," Amanda said carefully. "Your husband Thomas contacted me yesterday and requested that you be removed from all wedding invitations and seating arrangements." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually laughed, thinking I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" "Thomas has removed you from the guest list, Victoria. But he's asked that we proceed with all arrangements as planned and keep the $40,000 deposit you provided." The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of my desk, trying to process what I was hearing. My own husband had uninvited me from his brother's wedding while expecting to keep my money? The wedding I had been planning and paying for? "Amanda," I said slowly, my voice deadly calm. "Call it all off." "Excuse me?" "Cancel everything. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the music, the photography, everything. Cancel it all immediately." Amanda's voice rose in panic. "But Victoria, you can't just, you're not the bride. You don't have the authority to—" "Actually, I do." My voice was ice cold now. "I own the venue. I own the catering company. I own the floral business providing the arrangements. I own or have exclusive contracts with every single vendor involved in this wedding." The silence on the other end was deafening. I could practically hear Amanda's brain trying to process this information. I didn't realize," she stammered. "Clearly not. Thomas and Brandon hired you to plan their dream wedding, but they forgot one tiny detail. I'm the one who owns everything they need to make it happen." "Victoria, please, let's think about this rationally. There are 200 guests expecting—" "Those guests can expect disappointment then. If I'm not good enough to attend this wedding, then my businesses aren't good enough to provide services for it either. But the deposits, the contracts, the vendors are already booked." "Amanda, let me be very clear. As of this moment, Grandview Manor is no longer available for Brandon's wedding. Sterling Catering will not be providing food. Bloom Blossom will not be delivering flowers. Every vendor I recommended to you will receive a call within the next hour canceling their services." I could hear Amanda's breathing becoming rapid. "Victoria, you can't do this. The wedding is in 3 weeks. Do you have any idea how impossible it will be to find replacement vendors?" "That's not my problem anymore. Maybe Thomas should have thought about that before he decided I wasn't worthy of attending while still being worthy of paying for everything. Please, just give me a chance to sort this out. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Amanda. My husband made his choice very clear. Now I'm making mine." I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of supporting Thomas, of welcoming his family, of bending over backwards to make them happy. And this is how they repay me? My phone immediately started ringing again. Amanda's name flashed on the screen. I declined the call. It rang again. Declined. Then again. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing constantly. Text messages started flooding in. Amanda was clearly in full panic mode, probably realizing that she was about to have the most spectacular wedding disaster of her career. But I wasn't done yet. I picked up my office phone and started dialing. First call, Grandview Manor's event coordinator. Second call, Sterling Catering's operations manager. Third call, my florist. By the time I finished making my calls, my cell phone showed 37 missed calls and counting. The war had officially begun. Looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs from the very beginning. But love has a way of making you ignore red flags, doesn't it? Thomas and I met at a charity gala 5 years ago, one that I had organized and funded for the local children's hospital. He was charming, handsome, and seemed genuinely impressed by my work. "You did all this yourself?" he asked, gesturing around the beautifully decorated ballroom. We had raised over $200,000 that night. "Well, I had help," I said modestly, though I had indeed coordinated every detail myself. "But yes, this is what I do." Thomas was different from the other men I dated. He wasn't intimidated by my success or my money. At least, that's what I thought at the time. He pursued me relentlessly, sending flowers to my office, taking me to intimate dinners, making me feel like the most important person in his world. We were married within 18 months. I was so happy, so convinced I'd found my perfect partner. Thomas moved into my house, the sprawling estate I'd bought with my first big business success. He quit his mediocre job at a small accounting firm, and I helped him get a position at a prestigious financial company. I even co-signed for his student loans and paid them off as a wedding gift. "You're too generous," he would say, kissing my forehead. "I'm the luckiest man alive. I thought I was building a partnership. I thought we were a team." The first time I met his family, I should have paid more attention to the looks they exchanged. Patricia, his mother, smiled at me, but it never reached her eyes. She made little comments throughout dinner about my dress being a bit flashy, about my career being demanding for a wife, about how Thomas deserved someone who could focus on family. "Mom means well," Thomas assured me later. "She's just protective. She'll warm up to you." But she never did. Neither did Brandon, Thomas's golden boy younger brother. Brandon was 24 then, fresh out of college and completely directionless. While Thomas at least worked, Brandon seemed to float from one failed venture to another, always with his hand out to family for support. "Brandon's going through a rough patch," Thomas would say whenever his brother needed money. Family helps family, right? And I did help. I helped when Brandon needed rent money. I helped when he wanted to start a business that failed within 6 months. I helped when he needed a car, when he needed to pay off credit cards, when he needed anything at all. Because that's what family does, right? I threw myself into being the perfect wife and sister-in-law. I hosted every holiday dinner at our house. I organized birthday parties and family gatherings. I made sure Patricia had the best doctors when she had her health scare 2 years ago, and I paid for treatments her insurance wouldn't cover. When Brandon finally found a job and started dating Sophia, I was genuinely happy for him. Sophia was sweet, if a bit naive, and she seemed to bring out a better side of Brandon. When they got engaged last year, I was the first person Brandon called. "Victoria, we did it! Sophia said yes!" His excitement was infectious. "That's wonderful, Brandon. I'm so happy for you both. Listen, I know this is a lot to ask, but would you consider helping us with the wedding? I mean, you're the expert, and we want it to be perfect." Of course, I said yes. How could I not? This was my chance to finally prove myself to Thomas's family, to show them how much I cared about Brandon's happiness. I threw myself into planning their dream wedding. I booked my best venue, Grandview Manor, which usually has a 2-year waiting list. I arranged for my top catering team, my most talented florists, the best photographers in the city. I wanted everything to be absolutely perfect. "You're spending too much," Thomas said one evening as I showed him the latest plans. "It's Brandon's wedding," I replied. "It should be special." "But $40,000, Victoria? That's a lot of money." "We can afford it. Besides, he's your brother. This is important." Thomas smiled and kissed me. "You're amazing. Brandon's so lucky to have you as a sister-in-law." If only I had known then what I know now. The wedding planning should have been exciting, but from the very first meeting, I felt like I was walking through a minefield. Patricia insisted on being involved in every decision, despite the fact that I was paying for everything and had years of experience in event planning. "I think the flowers are too extravagant," she said during our second planning session, looking at the beautiful arrangements I'd designed. "Something simpler would be more appropriate." But these are Brandon and Sophia's favorites, I replied, trying to keep my voice pleasant. They specifically requested peonies and garden roses. Patricia's lips pursed. Well, I suppose if you insist on being so elaborate. The way she said elaborate made it sound like a dirty word. Sophia looked uncomfortable, caught between her future mother-in-law and me. I gave her an encouraging smile. It's your wedding, Sophia. What do you want? I love the flowers Victoria chose, Sophia said quietly. They're beautiful. Patricia's expression darkened, but she said nothing more. This became the pattern for every decision. Patricia would criticize my choices, I would defer to the couple's wishes, and tension would fill the room like smoke. Thomas started acting strangely around this time, too. He would take phone calls in another room, speaking in hushed tones. When I asked about them, he would brush me off. Just work stuff, he'd say. Nothing important. But I noticed he was spending more time at his mother's house. Family dinner, he'd explain, though these dinners seemed to happen 3 or 4 times a week now. When I offered to come along, he always had an excuse. Mom's feeling overwhelmed with the wedding planning. She needs some quiet family time. But I'm family too, I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. Of course you are. But you know how she gets. Let me handle this. The breaking point came during a tasting session at my catering company. I had arranged for Brandon and Sophia to sample our finest menu options, dishes that would normally cost twice what I was charging them. Patricia arrived uninvited. I hope you don't mind, she said, settling into a chair without waiting for an answer. I wanted to make sure the food would be suitable for our guests. Our guests, not Brandon and Sophia's guests. Our guests. As we went through each course, Patricia found fault with everything. The salmon was too fancy, the vegetarian option was too exotic, and the dessert selection was unnecessarily complicated. Perhaps something more traditional would be better, she suggested. Simple roast chicken, basic vegetables, nothing too showy. I watched Sophia's face fall. We had spent weeks planning this menu, choosing dishes that reflected both her and Brandon's tastes. Now Patricia was systematically dismantling everything. Mrs. Patterson, I said carefully, this menu was specifically designed based on Brandon and Sophia's preferences. These are their favorite dishes. Well, preferences change, Patricia replied coolly. And I think it's important to consider what's appropriate for a family celebration. What exactly do you mean by appropriate? I asked, my patience finally wearing thin. Patricia's eyes narrowed. I mean food that doesn't scream, look how much money we're spending. Some of us believe in modesty. The insult was clear. I was being too flashy, too extravagant, too much. Again. Mom, Brandon said uncomfortably, Victoria's doing us a huge favor here. Maybe we should... I'm just looking out for what's best for the family, Patricia interrupted. Someone has to think about these things practically. That night, I tried to talk to Thomas about his mother's behavior. We were getting ready for bed, and I thought it was the perfect time for an honest conversation. Thomas, I need to talk to you about your mother. He stiffened immediately. What about her? She's been very critical during the wedding planning. I feel like nothing I do is good enough for her. She's just stressed about the wedding. You know how mothers get. But she's undermining every decision Sophia and Brandon make. It's their wedding, not hers. Thomas turned to face me, and for a moment, I saw something cold in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Victoria, my mother has been planning weddings since before you were born. Maybe you should listen to her advice instead of assuming you know better. The words hit me like a slap. I'm not assuming anything. I'm a professional event planner. This is literally what I do for a living. And my mother raised 2 successful sons. Maybe show her some respect. I stared at him, speechless. When had my husband started talking to me like this? The phone calls kept coming, one after another, each more frantic than the last. I let them all go to voicemail while I sat in my office, trying to process what had just happened. Finally, curiosity got the better of me, and I started listening to the messages. The first few were from Amanda, her voice getting progressively more panicked with each call. But then I heard Brandon's voice, and everything became crystal clear. "Victoria, what the hell do you think you're doing? You can't just cancel everything. Call me back right now." Then Patricia's voice, sharp and demanding, "Victoria, this is completely unacceptable behavior. You're being childish and vindictive. Fix this immediately." But it was the fourth message that made my blood run cold. It was Thomas, and he wasn't alone. I could hear voices in the background, Brandon and Patricia talking rapidly. "Victoria, we need to talk. Look, maybe we handled this wrong, but you're overreacting. Just reverse the cancellations and we'll figure this out." Then I heard Patricia's voice clearly in the background. "Tell her if she doesn't fix this, we'll sue her for breach of contract." And Brandon, this is exactly why we wanted her out of the wedding in the first place. She's too dramatic. My hands started shaking as the pieces fell into place. This wasn't a sudden decision by Thomas. This was planned. They had all been planning this together. I grabbed my laptop and started digging through my emails, looking for any clues I might have missed. What I found made me sick to my stomach. 3 weeks ago, Thomas had forwarded an email to Brandon, an email he thought he'd sent from his personal account, but it had accidentally come from our shared family account. The subject line read, "Wedding guest list, final version." I opened it with trembling fingers. "Brandon, here's the updated list without Victoria. Mom thinks it's better this way, and honestly, I agree. She's been way too controlling about everything, and this is supposed to be your day, not hers. We'll keep all her vendor arrangements since we've already paid the deposits, but at least we won't have to deal with her hovering over everything during the actual event. Mom suggested we tell her there was a family-only policy for the ceremony. Let me know if this works for you." Brandon's response was even worse. "Perfect. Honestly, I never wanted her there anyway. She always makes everything about herself and her fancy business connections. Sophia agrees, but she's too nice to say anything. This way we get the perfect wedding without the drama." I scrolled through more emails, finding an entire thread between Thomas, Brandon, and Patricia discussing how to handle the Victoria situation. They had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. Patricia had written, "The girl has always been too flashy for our family. This wedding should reflect our values, not her need to show off. If we're going to use her vendors, fine, but I don't want her there making a spectacle." Thomas had replied, "I'll handle it. She'll be upset at first, but she'll get over it. She always does." The casual cruelty of that last line hit me like a physical blow. She always does. How many times had they dismissed me, hurt me, and expected me to just get over it? My phone rang again. This time it was Sophia, and against my better judgment, I answered. "Victoria?" Her voice was small and scared. "I just heard what happened. I had no idea they were planning to... I didn't know you weren't invited." "You didn't know your own future mother-in-law and fiancé were uninviting me from your wedding?" "No, I swear I didn't know. Brandon just told me there was some kind of family issue and that the guest list had to be adjusted. I thought maybe it was about seating arrangements or something." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Sophia, I found emails. They've been planning this for weeks. They wanted to keep my money and my vendors but didn't want me there." The silence on the other end stretched for a long moment. Then Sophia started crying. "I'm so sorry, Victoria. I never wanted this. I tried to ask Brandon about it, but he said it was complicated family stuff and I shouldn't worry about it." "Well, now you don't have to worry about anything. There's no wedding to plan anymore. Please, Victoria, isn't there some way to fix this? I know what they did was wrong, but..." "Sophia, they used me. They took my money, my connections, my generosity, and then threw me away like garbage, and they expected me to just accept it." The front door slammed downstairs. Thomas was home. I heard Thomas's footsteps pounding up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. He burst into my office without knocking, his face red with anger and panic. Behind him, I could hear car doors slamming in our driveway. Patricia and Brandon had arrived too. "Victoria, what have you done?" Thomas demanded, his voice shaking. "Do you have any idea what you've just destroyed?" I looked up at him calmly from my desk chair, my hands folded in my lap. "I destroyed nothing, Thomas. I simply withdrew my support from people who clearly don't want me around. This is insane. You can't just cancel an entire wedding because your feelings got hurt." "My feelings got hurt?" I stood up slowly, my voice dangerously quiet. "Thomas, you removed me from your brother's wedding guest list while expecting to keep my $40,000. You planned this behind my back for weeks, and you think this is about hurt feelings?" His face went pale. He knew I'd found the emails. "Victoria, let me explain." "Explain what? How you, your mother, and your brother sat around discussing how to get rid of me while keeping my money? How you called me controlling and dramatic? How you said I'd get over it because I always do?" Thomas opened his mouth to respond, but Patricia's voice cut through the air as she marched into my office like she owned the place. "Victoria, this tantrum has gone far enough. You will call those vendors right now and restore everything exactly as it was." I turned to look at her, this woman who had spent years making me feel unwelcome in my own family. "I will do no such thing." "Yes, you will," Patricia said, her voice ice cold. "Because if you don't, we'll sue you for every penny. Breach of contract, intentional interference with business relationships, emotional distress. We'll take everything you have." I actually laughed. "Sue me? With what money, Patricia? You're living on Social Security and whatever Thomas gives you from the allowance I provide him." Her face turned purple with rage. "How dare you speak to me like that? How dare I? How dare you come into my house and threaten me after what you've done?" Brandon appeared in the doorway, looking frantic. "Victoria, please. You have to understand. This wasn't personal. We just thought it would be easier if..." "If what, Brandon? If you could use my money and connections without having to actually include me? If you could have your perfect wedding without the embarrassment of your brother's wife being there? That's not what this was about." "Then what was it about?" I pulled up the email thread on my laptop and turned the screen toward them. "Because according to these emails, I'm too flashy, too controlling, and too dramatic for your family values." Thomas stepped forward, his face desperate. "Victoria, those emails, we were just venting. We didn't mean..." "You didn't mean for me to find out. There's a difference." Patricia's voice turned sickeningly sweet, the way it did when she was trying to manipulate someone. "Victoria, dear, you're clearly upset and not thinking clearly. Why don't you take some time to calm down and then we can discuss this like adults?" "I am perfectly calm, Patricia. And I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. You're destroying Brandon's wedding out of spite. I'm protecting my business interests. If I'm not good enough to attend this wedding as a guest, then my businesses aren't good enough to provide services for it either." Brandon's voice cracked with desperation. "Victoria, Sophia is downstairs crying. She had nothing to do with this. You're punishing her for something she didn't even know about. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to humiliate me." Thomas grabbed my arm, his grip tight enough to hurt. "Victoria, stop this right now. You're being completely unreasonable." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. "Let go of me, not until you fix this mess. Thomas, let go of my arm right now or I'll call the police and have you removed from my house." He dropped his hand like I'd burned him, finally realizing how serious I was. Patricia's mask finally slipped completely. "You ungrateful little witch. After everything this family has done for you." "What exactly has this family done for me, Patricia? Please, enlighten me." The room fell silent. They all stood there, realizing they had no answer to that question. Because the truth was, I had done everything for them. The silence stretched for a long, uncomfortable moment before Patricia found her voice again. "We welcomed you into this family. Stop. I held up my hand. Just stop with the lies. You never welcomed me. You tolerated me because I paid for everything. I walked over to my filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. Do you want to know what this family has cost me over the past 5 years? Let me break it down for you. I opened the folder and started reading from the financial records I'd been keeping. Brandon's rent when he couldn't find a job, $12,000. His failed business venture, $25,000. His car loan that he defaulted on, $18,000. Patricia's medical bills, $32,000. Thomas's student loans, $45,000. Their faces grew paler with each number. That's just the big stuff. Should I go through the smaller amounts? The birthday gifts, the Christmas presents, the family vacations I paid for, the dinners, We never asked you to keep track, Brandon protested. You're right. You never asked me to keep track because you never intended to pay any of it back. You just expected me to keep giving and giving while you planned to exclude me from the most important family event in years. Thomas stepped forward, his voice pleading. Victoria, we can fix this. We made a mistake, okay? We'll add you back to the guest list. We'll make it right. Oh, now you want to make it right after I found out about your little conspiracy? After you got caught? I picked up my phone and started dialing. Let me show you exactly how much power you thought you could use without consequences. The first call was to my venue coordinator. Hi, Janet. Yes, I know about the cancellation. I need you to call the Morrison wedding that's been on our waiting list for 2 years. Tell them Grandview Manor just became available for their date. Yes, the premium package, full price. I hung up and dialed again while they watched in horror. Sterling Catering? This is Victoria. The Patterson wedding cancellation just freed up our best team for the Henderson anniversary party. Yes, the one that was willing to pay double our usual rate for that date. Patricia lunged forward. You can't do this. We have contracts. Actually, I can. Every contract has a clause about payment default. Since Thomas removed me from the guest list while keeping my deposit, that constitutes a material breach. My lawyers will be very interested in that. I made 3 more calls, systematically replacing their canceled services with higher-paying clients who had been waiting for availability. Each call was another nail in the coffin of their dream wedding. Brandon was pacing now, running his hands through his hair. This is insane. You're destroying everything over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I pulled up another email on my laptop. Brandon, you wrote, and I quote, honestly, I never wanted her there anyway. She always makes everything about herself. Which part of that was misunderstood? Sophia appeared in the doorway, her eyes red from crying. Victoria, please. I know what they did was wrong. But isn't there some way to work this out? The wedding is in 3 weeks. Our families are flying in from across the country. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy for her. She really was innocent in all this. But then I remembered how easily she'd accepted the explanation that I was being excluded for family reasons without questioning it. Sophia, I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this. But your fiancé and his family made their choice. They chose to use me and then discard me. Now they get to live with the consequences. Thomas's phone started ringing. He answered it, his face growing more panicked as he listened. Yes, I understand. No, we can't. What do you mean the deposit is non-refundable? He hung up and turned to me with desperate eyes. That was the photographer. He's saying since you canceled through your vendor network, we forfeit the deposit and he's already booked another client. That's how business works, Thomas. When you break contracts, there are penalties. Patricia's voice was shaking with rage. You vindictive little... Careful, Patricia. You're in my house, remember? My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and smiled. Oh, this is interesting. Apparently word is already spreading through the vendor network. 3 more companies just declined to work with the Patterson family, even if you could afford their services. The room erupted in chaos, as they all started talking at once, pleading, threatening, and demanding. But I was done listening. I had spent years being the perfect wife, the generous sister-in-law, the respectful daughter-in-law. And this was how they repaid me. Well, Now they were about to learn what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. 6 months later, I sat in my newly renovated office, looking out at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The divorce papers had been finalized last week, and I'd never felt more free in my life. The immediate aftermath of that terrible day had been swift and brutal for Thomas's family. Within 24 hours of my cancellations, word had spread throughout the entire wedding industry in our city. When you own or have partnerships with most of the premium vendors, news travels fast. Brandon and Sophia had tried desperately to salvage their wedding. They called every venue, every caterer, every florist in a 50-mile radius. But my reputation in the industry meant something, and when vendors heard that the Patterson family had tried to use my services while excluding me from the event, doors slammed shut everywhere they turned. The few vendors who were willing to work with them quoted prices 3 times the normal rate, what we call the difficult client premium. Brandon's savings account, which had been modest to begin with, was wiped out in a matter of days. Patricia had tried to rally other family members to contribute money, but when the story came out how they'd planned to use my $40,000 while uninviting me, even Thomas's relatives were disgusted. His Aunt Margaret, who had always been the family matriarch, called Patricia to express her profound disappointment in the family's behavior. The wedding was eventually postponed indefinitely. Sophia's parents, who had flown in from Oregon, were mortified when they learned what had happened. Sophia's father, a quiet man who worked as a high school principal, had pulled Brandon aside and told him exactly what he thought of a man who would treat family that way. Thomas had tried everything to win me back. He'd shown up at my office with flowers, written long letters explaining how his family had pressured him, even offered to cut contact with Patricia and Brandon completely. But it was too late. The emails I'd found weren't written under pressure. They were his true feelings, finally expressed honestly. "I never meant for it to go this far," he'd pleaded during one of our last conversations. "I just wanted to keep the peace with my family." "And I wanted a husband who would choose me over keeping the peace," I'd replied. We both learned something about each other that day. The divorce settlement had been surprisingly straightforward. Since I'd owned everything before our marriage and had kept meticulous financial records, Thomas left with exactly what he'd brought into the relationship, which wasn't much. The house, the businesses, the investments, all remained mine. Brandon had tried to get a job in finance like his brother, but word of the wedding scandal had somehow reached his potential employers. In a city where business relationships matter, being known as someone who bites the hand that feeds them wasn't exactly a selling point. He was currently working at a retail store and living in a studio apartment. Patricia had been forced to move in with her sister after Thomas could no longer afford to supplement her income. The last I'd heard, she was telling anyone who would listen that I was a vindictive woman who destroyed a family over a simple misunderstanding. Sophia had eventually broken up with Brandon 3 months after the canceled wedding. She'd realized that a man who would treat his own family with such callousness wasn't someone she wanted to build a life with. She'd sent me a handwritten letter, apologizing for not standing up for me, and thanking me for showing her Brandon's true character before it was too late. As for me, my business had actually grown stronger. The story of how I'd stood up for myself had spread through professional networks, and I'd gained a reputation as someone who wouldn't be taken advantage of. Several high-profile clients had specifically sought me out because they respected how I'd handled the situation. I'd also started dating again, a kind, successful architect named Michael who treated me like an equal partner and actually seemed proud of my accomplishments rather than threatened by them. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. The Henderson anniversary party was a huge success. They want to book you for their daughter's wedding next year. I smiled and typed back, "Schedule a meeting, and make sure they understand. I only work with people who value both my services and my presence. Some lessons I'd learned are worth $40,000, and some people aren't worth a single penny more.